Yeah.
They won.
They won today?
No, in the seventh. I've got it 3-1 into the seventh. They're winning.
So they lost 2.
Good, Danielle. Thank you for
Yeah.
taking care of us. Thanks for the count on you.
Yeah, but, yes. So.
And the silence falls over the room.
This is Chris, your 3X4 number.
Because he actually had to either sit there next to it or open his mouth and leave it.
The companies when I call.
Have you heard that expression?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Chris, what he does. So
Maybe got me.
that would send you paperwork.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they also said, they never got our slides back. What did she think?
No.
She said they got them.
I thought
It's his birthday. Oh, that's right.
What happened?
Don't we, don't we sanction?
They give us a receipt.
It's
So maybe different, we get it different ways. We always
The
have-
Montana.
Welcome, everyone. This is a special council meeting of South Russell Village Council. It was originally going to be a public utilities committee, but when council members are all able to be here, so we'll do a roll call of the council first.
Bell.
Here.
Berger.
Here.
Canton.
Here.
Kavanaugh.
Here.
Galicki is absent. Porter.
Here. Okay, we need a motion to excuse Councilman Galicki.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're here to talk about the Paw Paw Lake situation. This is a one-item special council meeting. So if you have any questions about trash day and things like that, we can't really get into that, but maybe afterward you get a hold of Tim or something, because that's coming up. Public utilities, would you like to speak first, or would you rather hear from Paw Paw Lake? What would you prefer?
Well, let me just make an opening comment. At the last council, at the special council meeting concerning stormwater, we heard you. We listened, we said, we need to get together with the residents of Paw Paw Lake. We need to understand what's going on. We need to have feedback and conversation. So that's why we scheduled this meeting. Apologize for its early nature. There was a scheduling conflict. But, so what we need to understand, public utilities, through the leadership of Councilman Porter, is responsible for stormwater issues in the village. So that's why public utilities called this meeting, okay? It's kind of a misnomer, but it's all right. We're stormwater. That's what we want to talk about. So, so thank you very much for making the effort to be here on short notice and to have this conversation with us. We want to hear good constructive ideas and have good dialogue, and hopefully get some issues on the table that we can move forward with and find solutions. So that's why we did what we did. Okay.
Danielle, for the people that are out there, they're on our YouTube channel, and you may have some people that just couldn't make it. If you wanted to text them and tell them, hey, go on to the South Russell Village YouTube, they can see this. They can't participate, but at least they could hear and see what's going on. State law doesn't allow outside participation. But this way, if you wanted to notify somebody, because I know, as Mr. Berger said, it's kind of a short notice. Mr. Porter, you want to say anything?
Sure. Paw Paw Lake's silt pond seems to be the main issue, and secondarily, the swim lake. And I wanted to hear from the residents about where the dredging of the silt pond stands. I mean, I drive by it periodically, it looks like they're still working on it. Is there an estimated completion date for the silt pond?
You know, I'm Chris Manchester, I'm at 115 Paw Paw, I'm currently on board.
Okay.
And we've been working on this for, I want to say, at least 6 months at this point. And the contractor has been in and out, obviously because of the winter, he couldn't continue with the project. But because of rain, because of, just the issues he's had with just the amount of water that's gone through, he's had to start and stop. So at this point, I mean, he's moving along. If you look at the silt pond, you probably would see that we're probably about 2/3 of it. It's cleaned out. But I know that, and he did soundings beforehand, and now he's saying to us, boy, this is a much, much bigger project than he ever imagined. And I take that with somewhat of a grain of salt, but we also did just have the silt pond dredged roughly 6 years ago. So the silt pond is just filling up, and it's much faster than we've ever seen before. Second thing I can point out is that, during these heavy rains, we've taken the lake down 3 to 4 feet. And you'll go to bed at night and the rain will be coming down, and we'll wake up in the morning and we've got water going over the spillway, and it fills right back up. So it just tells us that we've got so much more water coming into that silt pond, into Paw Paw Lake, than we've ever had before.
And actually Chris knows that because he's the one that puts on the waders and has taken out the block and the so on. So he's the one that helps control the level of the lake. So when you take out, and it's a very heavy concrete type block thing between silt and the lake, I can't even lift it. It's very heavy. Immediately the water starts to flow away and over the spillway. And so what he's talking about is it fills back up overnight with the rain.
Yeah, I mean, the silt pond itself just, it fills right back up. It's as high or higher than what it would be on a normal day, and it's because of, we can blame it on a lot of things, climate change, all of those things, but it's a problem. And we just know that the silt pond's just filling up much faster than it's ever had before. And I do know that there's been meetings before that I have not been part of, where there's been a lot of discussions. I'm sure there's been some people that get angry about this, but it's not just a Paw Paw problem. It's the combination of all of this runoff from lots of different places. And it's just difficult for a community to say, okay, every 6 years we're going to be dredging that silt pond. And it's not because of, really what's coming in.
Truly, we need to do more than just the silt pond
Yes.
at this point.
That was kind of my follow-up. What about the swim lake? You all have plans to dredge the swim lake anytime soon, or does it need it, or what's the current status?
There's no question that the swim lake needs to be dredged.
Okay.
And I think that, through this process, we've looked at it and said, okay, how do we address it? Because we're talking about, $250,000 at least to dredge that lake. So, our thought was, okay, what do? We take it in bites, and we fund for it, try to fund for it. But you can look at the south end of the lake, and the south end of the lake, it's virtually full. It's almost like the silt pond. And then as you get further north, it gets deeper. But we've seen this, at one point, Paw Paw Lake had a diving board. There's just no way. If we're 8 feet in some spots, it's rare. And now we're getting to, 8, 6 feet, but it's filling up, so we have to do something about it. it's, you know, it's our community, it's the foundation, it's the, you know, the central piece of Paw Paw, and for us to, you know, let that lake go, you know, we'd be losing a lot. So we won't do that, but again, we realize that there's just so much coming into it, and it's not just, you know, Paw Paw.
Can I add one thing to what Chris is saying?
Heidi, give your address too.
Okay, hi, Heidi Bongar, 95 Paw Paw Lake. I know when we've looked for many years, every year, at the different dredging parts, and Chris made the point about taking it in pieces. At one point, there was even, it might even be a map, I don't know who has it, there's like actually 7 or 8 silt ponds around the lake. There are other places that are like catch basins of silt, and all of those are filled, and then we have this one, like the main part of the lake that Chris is referencing. So when you think about it like that, when we call it like the swamp pond or whatever, like, yeah, I mean, like as far as like how that lake is actually built, there's several places that are still holding it. You can see a lot of that if you walk around the lake currently while it's lowered due to our project. So just,
Eric, I don't know this, and I just heard, coming out of Bainbridge is a huge farm. If a farmer does something differently with the way they plow their fields, because this water's coming out of that Bainbridge farm right down to Paw Paw. Is there any truth to that comment?
Perhaps any number of factors can influence the amount of water and silt that gets carried with the water that ends up in Paw Paw. The more water that flows through the drainage channels, and the faster that the water moves through those drainage channels, the more energy it has to hold in suspension all of the soil and silt particles that you guys are ultimately seeing when they hit your silt pond, and all of a sudden the energy dissipates and they all settle out. The little map rendering that shows the tributaries that lead into Paw Paw Lake is only really about 50% complete, because I was looking at just the areas that were not impacted by another pond or a lake where it would discharge and dissipate that energy. As far as water flow that comes in, there's another branch that goes from the Lake Louise all the way over to, I think this is Lake in the Woods in Bainbridge, and then almost as far south on the west side of Haskins Road as what I've got shown on the east side of Haskins Road. So there's a whole other leg that comes up to Lake in the Woods and connects that over to Lake Louise. I didn't show that because that's not where you're getting silt from, because it's got an opportunity to hit Lake in the Woods and drop, and then it's got an opportunity to hit Lake Louise and drop. So the blue line doesn't really do justice to the amount of just acreage that is tributary flow-wise, volume-wise, to Paw Paw Lake. And what you guys are saying about, we take the lake down and there's, perhaps millions of gallons that are over the dam, over the bridge, when the lake is down, and overnight they can fill right back up. During the intense rain, that doesn't surprise me one bit. When I don't typically look, when I look at village drainage issues, I tend to be a little bit insular and look just, here in the village. When the first time, this is the first time I ever really took a good hard look at how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres are in runoff from those hundreds of acres are tributary to Paw Paw Lake. I was a little bit surprised by that. So I thought the map was a really good illustrator about it's not just a little bit of water that comes in. It's an enormous amount of water that's ultimately passing through. So back to the question at hand. Could events upstream that are tributary to Paw Paw Lake, could change in land use, new construction, construction of more impervious surfaces, asphalt driveways, rooftops, barns, sheds, you name it. Yeah, when you add all of those things up together, it absolutely is going to affect what's downstream. And I think that's a large part of what the Paw Paw Lake community is seeing as the areas in South Russell and beyond get even more built up. And as you kind of alluded to climate change, and I know people are neither here nor there on it. Some people are way over here, and some people are way over there. I can't say definitively that we are getting, the rain that we're getting is more intense in nature than it has been in past decades. Are we still getting the same amount of rain per year, give or take? Yeah. It's just coming in more intense packets of rain during a shorter duration, but more intense storms.
Right.
So you're getting kind of that big like wash through that's really giving us a lot of energy and velocity to pick up all of that soil particles and take it to Paw Paw Lake. Yesterday, I had a conversation with our streets commissioner, and he said, "Oh, it would be great if you could look at areas, immediately upstream of Paw Paw Lake and determine if there's any areas that are, really susceptible to erosion and really could be contributing hard to the amount of soil that's being washed down." Not really. There's a pretty even, at least not in the village. There's a pretty even gradient. I mean, this little tributary that comes off of like Snyder Road and over, that is so flat. I mean, you don't have a big like water slide effect where the water is really just sluicing down the channel and picking up, all sorts of energy and debris and washing it in. And I know just from experience and walking back there, that as you get south of Cascades Drive, that stream is all like sandstone, hard bottom. It's like it's a stone bottom stream, so you're getting little to no contribution of soil and debris particles that you're picking up, at least through that section.
Sure.
I was hopeful to find an area where we could say, oh, there's a really steep gradient. It's on a really looser soil type, and all of that soil is washing in. There wasn't the smoking gun,
Bell Road,
so to say.
Bell Road.
Sure. I mean, that's just roadside ditches, and it's a little bit from a whole lot of areas. There's not like one spot where I can say, oh my gosh, the erosive force through, in this 500 or 1,000 foot section of stream is really scouring out, and all of that soil is coming from this spot. I didn't find that. Just looking at elevations topographically, like there's not a really steep gradient and hydraulic grade line on any of that section of stream that's in the village. I didn't spin my wheels too much looking at the gradients as we flow, as we go south into Bainbridge Township, because we have a whole lot less control over. Like if we could make an improvement perhaps in the village, but I can't inflict that onto our neighbors to the south. They just say, oh, so what? It doesn't matter to us.
Right.
I wanted to say, I'm sorry, do you want to go ahead? So I've been walking right before he started dredging. We knew that this man was going to come and start dredging. Chris had everything lowered, so we were down to stream level. That water rushes through there from it'd be the south end of the Bell Road Bridge coming in. When there's no amount of water in the silt pond, there's a lot of water coming in, and this was on sunny days. I only walk on the good days. So there is a lot of water coming in.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. The farms, I don't know, unless are you speaking of these farms here that would be by Snyder?
No, I think what Bill was talking about was the farm. There's a big plowed field. You see that area that's like by Lake in the Woods, and I don't know why on the GIS website it's like a horseshoe with shaded blue.
Yeah.
There's a big plowed field there.
But he's had that.
Right, he's had that.
That's not new.
I can't say that, that guy or that specific parcel is the source of, the bulk of the woes and the silt flowing in. Is it a contributor? Well, certainly it is, but I would say probably no more than anywhere else along that line.
The newest thing is, and it's 20 21, 22 years old is Ashley subdivision, and Silver Creek runs right through there.
Right.
One thing that I think about, and I know we're talking a lot about the silt pan.
Tell them who you
Oh, I'm
are.
sorry, Claire Roush, 63 Paw Paw Lake. We're talking a lot about the silt pond because that's the project we have at hand. But I can just tell you from our property, it's not just the water coming into our silt pond, it's the water coming.
Oh, from surrounding areas,
Everywhere.
for sure.
I mean, when we have a rain, and I'm not just talking about the last couple of years when we've had really hard rains, we've been in the neighborhood almost 9 years and we've had this experience the whole time. We're on the west side, just as you're driving in, and so we're downhill. I can have 4 or 5 inches rushing through my front yard, down the side of our yard into the backyard. And all of that is carrying sediment too, but it's coming across Paw Paw Lake, across our neighbor, across the street from behind their home.
From Silver Springs.
Well, I mean, I don't have that helicopter view, but that would be my assumption, like what's going on back there that we're getting that amount of water. I mean, literally, I could send my kids down it in a tube if I wanted to. There's so much water.
Eric, if I heard you correctly, there's not one point on this map that is contributing the most to this problem, but there's several points.
Yes, and the residents are right, like all of the things that don't even show up topographically. Like you said, there's, you know, the 8 silt ponds, like smaller silt ponds around the lake. Yes, I mean, the lake is the low point and it's a giant bowl, everything from the surrounding. This just shows the main channels that come in. If I was gonna, you know, blob that in with green, I mean, it would be 1,500, 2,000 acres of, you know, everything. And everything all around that lake, it all funnels in. I mean, just for purposes of argument or purposes of a touch point to talk about, yeah, there's an enormous main channel that comes in, but you can't discount all of the sheet flow that comes into that lake, because it certainly is contributing to the volume problem and the silt problem. I mean, you're right, anytime there's flowing water and that flowing water starts picking up speed, it also increases the likelihood that it's also going to be carrying sediment particles with it.
Now, I'm sorry.
On that note, I mean, like Clear is on the inside of the lake, so are we like in a similar like corner? And we have 2 swales on each side of our property because of how the elevation goes straight down. I mean, it's probably like 12, 15 feet from top to bottom, the top of our houses to the bottom where it's going towards the lake. And we have these erosion swales where anything near it, like right now at this point for 2-3 years, we don't even have grass. We didn't even try. They're just rock, gravel, dirt slides. We don't even put mulch in those areas because we can't keep it there unless you're adding it to the stone. And so if all of the inside properties are doing that, as far as, you know, silt and erosion and debris, like it's, I don't know, there's 20 houses on the east side, maybe 15, 20 homes.
That's probably fair.
Yeah, I guess.
Is that a different experience from years previously?
We've been there 6 years, and every year it's got increasingly worse.
And I guess my question too is, like, I know the conversation is, as a private community, there are hurdles. But if that water, and this is my view, is coming to my property from Silver Springs, what could be done there to manage the water better before it gets to us?
Right.
And I'm sure that could be said on Bell Road, coming down on both directions, and probably on the west side of the lake as well.
Right. Now,
Even use it.
Right?
I've said this before in council, I'm gonna say it again. Wise person once told me there's no such thing as a problem, only solutions. So we have to come up with solutions.
Okay. And I agree with you, but tonight, we came thinking that this was a silt pond issue. I did. I thought, okay, if we could somehow address the silt pond issue, that would address the issues for all of Paw Paw Lake. what I'm hearing now is that's not enough. That just addressing the silt pond doesn't solve all of your water issues. So we have a much bigger concern. Are you hearing that too, Mark?
I'm wondering, I think your silt pond's probably the biggest problem to
It is.
begin with.
Yeah.
Right? If that problem gets solved, then you evaluate to see what else needs to be done, right? So if the silt pond is addressed, that will have a positive impact on the swim lake and also on your water issues.
Well, I think it would be foolish for us to do anything with the swim lake before the silt pond is fixed, because then we're just gonna empty the lake to put the silt pond silt in there. So yeah, I think that's the first problem that needs to be addressed for us in our little bubble, but that, yeah, like what's the greater community action steps?
If the village were to, on the south side of Bell, where the water comes from Lake Louise and Silver Creek, if we put a silt pond there, would that help Paw Paw Lake?
On the Bramble property you're talking about, Mayor? Right here.
Yes, you got it, yeah.
Okay. I would think it would help.
Anything that catches silt before it gets into our silt pond will help our silt pond. You're probably creating a different problem.
It's the same problem, we're just
It's the
moving
same
it.
problem, you're just moving it down. You've got a fundamental, over time, you've got a deterioration of the waterways that's allowing acceleration of the flow of silt. So that's a beginning of a solution to us, but if you look at the southern portion of our lake and the condition that it's in that condition because the silt pond is filled. So if you create a silt pond south of Bell, and that's the only solution, and you don't keep that clean, we're gonna have the same problem at our silt pond sometime after that.
Essentially, our south lake has served as a silt pond the last couple of years because our silt pond was full. So I think what Rich is saying is that would just potentially delay our silt pond filling, but eventually the problem would just continue to flow down.
I thought,
We-
but I don't
You're
know.
talking, we need your name and address.
27 Paw Paw Lake, sorry.
And Patrick Bransco, 74 Paw Paw Lake.
So you said you dredged the silt pond 6 years ago. What was the
It was
free?
in 2015, at the end of 2015, so almost 8 years
Almost
ago
eight.
now.
So what was the frequency prior to that?
Prior to that, it was 2000, so 15 years before that. And the reality is, while we're doing it now, that silt pond, we quoted that silt pond dredging 2 years ago. So we really needed to dredge it 4 to 5 years after it was done. And prior to 2000, it's quite a long time before that.
1970,
So-
when it was constructed.
So you're seeing an acceleration, and part of it's a function of a lot of different things. I mean, I'm not gonna, it's, what we saw after 2015, whether you ultimately agree with it or not, we think had a lot to do with the East Ohio gas mains that went in. There's a lot of dirt still going in. But you've got a lot of development, you've got road projects and bridge projects that dump dirt ultimately into our waterways that end up in our silt pond, because that's where it all flows. And we bear the brunt of that financially.
To add a couple, years on what we're just saying, so we quoted it in 2020, but when we moved in 2017, and I immediately joined the board, we were talking about the changes in the dredging from the 2015 dredging in 2018. We were noticing that was filling up immediately, and we were contacting, I'm sure there's plenty of records, in 3 years we were noticing, and we were saying, what is going on post this gas line issue? Or post the gas line project, and we spent probably a year of various folks reaching out to the council and to anything we could, saying, that project is wildly affecting our dredging lake immediately, or our the dredging project in the silt pond immediately. And it just because Paw Paw was then at that time, we ended up, as some of you know, spending more time on trying to figure out how we're gonna pay for our road that wildly eroded simultaneously. So then we were on our road project, and that's why we didn't really close the lake until 2020.
What year was the gas line? I wasn't on council, so I didn't pay attention.
That was done in
Citizen very well.
16. Was it not, Eric? Wasn't that 2016?
Yeah.
We dredged in
Exactly. That
15.
sounds about right.
And you were on the board in 17. And
We
it was
moved
up,
in 17, and it was just finishing up, or it had just been finished.
and shortly thereafter, a few years is already
So
connecting the dots.
from the perspective of problem solving, if South Russell entertains that silt pond on the south side of Bell Road and it was appropriately maintained, I guess the question is, then would that allow us to go a more reasonable amount of time between our dredgings? Because I think that's part of, like, you're always gonna have to dredge, right? But we don't wanna be dredging every 5 or fewer years.
Or, it's a combination from an expense standpoint, it's a combination of two things. The amount, how frequently we have to do it, and the amount of silt that we pull out. They charge you by the depth of the silt. So if the health of the water flowing into our silt pond is better, and we can dredge less frequently and pull less silt out, like what we're pulling out right now is absurd. If we can do that, we can minimize expense and it becomes more manageable for us. I mean, ultimately, this is a public waterway. All of this, all of this that flows through, but it's private property. So it flows through publicly, it's why there should be some type of governmental grants to address this, the health of the streams and the lakes in the community. We own that property, but we don't have the ability to do much other than maintain it for the benefit of everybody else, honestly, because that water has to continue to flow through our community to get to the Chagrin River.
The other thing I want to bring up about the silt pond on the south side of Bell, why would South Russell entertain the cost of creating another silt pond when I think maintaining our silt pond, I don't know that there's gonna be cost involved, wouldn't it be just as easy to help us maintain our silt pond as opposed to building a whole nother silt pond? I don't know that really fundamentally changes anything, it just slows down the flow of silt. And I agree with Rich, if any of you have not driven by our development in the last several weeks, I mean, take a look at how much silt is being pulled out of there, it is unbelievable. I mean, our entire field on the front of fronting Bell is now covered with several feet thick of silt that we pulled out of that silt.
I gotta say, Chris Bell asked if he could have a date with me over the weekend, and the whole silt pond was, you couldn't even see. But you know what I mean.
Let's keep your first one.
For the record, for my wife, it's to see the
It's a
public.
mess. Chris Bell asked if he could come over and would I walk him around and show him whatever. The silt pond water level was totally high, so he couldn't see what had been done. Today, you can see about halfway down, and so it stays open. I think tomorrow is supposed to be nice enough. If anybody wants to come, we would meet wherever and we could show you. We'd be happy to. But they tried. They did try.
And I just want to, I'm Jean Turk, I'm at 50 Paw Paw Lake. And I know Patrick, I was on the board, I was secretary for 3 years. And I know Patrick, when you were on the lake committee, we talked about, once the silt pond was cleaned out, we were gonna we talked about doing yearly soundings?
Yeah.
To we were planning on being a little more accurate as, seeing how much, what the rate is that it's filling up. And also just understanding the way watersheds work, even if you did put a silt pond on the south side of Bell Road is asphalt. and any water coming down Bell is most likely, understanding the way watershed work is gonna go into our lake, into our silt pond anyway. It's not gonna go into one on the south side. I mean, that would help Silver Creek coming down, but that's just a thought I had.
Can somebody on our group speak to, we were looking at, because of the lack of depth, there were other lake, like swimming lake solutions for like general maintenance that like just didn't apply to us.
Yeah,
So-
Areas.
Yeah,
Aerators.
aerators, and we were treating our lake ourselves, but it literally, because of the way that the lake has gotten shallower and shallower, it's just gotten too hard for us to even control. So we have aqueduct coming in now because it literally, the lake heats up and cools down so rapidly because of the depth of it that it's gotten to the point where we can't even control it. And we also can't integrate technology like aerators because of the shallowness of the lake, they would not be effective. So, and again, the south portion of our lake, if you guys came out and actually came from where our pavilion is at south, is effectively acted as a second silt pond since our silt pond filled up. And by that, if you go out there in a canoe, you could stick a paddle down and touch the bottom on the south side of our lake. That's how shallow that's got.
Does Aqueduct treat the silt pond also?
They do now.
They do
They do
now.
not, yeah.
We would treat it, Brandon would actually go out in a kayak and go around with a bag of material and try to treat the silt pond with an effort but it was really, I mean, he could basically go in a one-man kayak and barely be able to go through the silt pond. That's how shallow it was. Like, we're talking a foot to a foot and a half was all deeper.
Can I ask a quick question? What is an aqueduct? Is it like algal blooms that they're treating the water for algae, or what are they?
Algae blooms.
Okay,
It's just primarily to keep the algae.
got it, thank you.
I imagine that vegetation's a lot more now that it's shallower.
Yeah, because it heats up a lot
Yeah.
faster, yeah.
And that costs us about $10,000 a year.
What's the design depth for the silt pond and for the swim lake?
I should be able to tell you that, and I don't know that I can. I think it's close to 10 feet. Does anybody else remember?
For the, which one?
The silt pond.
For the silt pond.
It might have been deeper. It looks deeper, just looking at it right now. It looks deeper with the stuff he's taken out. So I could go back through the old records and do that.
So presumably the swim lake would have been deeper
Oh, it
than the
was, it
silt
was
pond?
very deep.
I mean, if you had diving boards at one time, it had to be at least 15, 20 feet deep.
It was 18 feet where the diving board was, which was right by the sand beach.
Okay.
It was 20 feet over, if you go across the dam by Tim's house, it was 20 feet over there. And my mother said that is the deepest part of the lake. It's not even deep at all anymore.
A
So-
5'8" person could walk.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're sludging through sludge, but you
Right.
can walk to the center of the lake. You can walk pretty far
Yeah.
to the lake.
Well, where we said, what we still do, where we had a rope swing, where you would swing and that's not only about 3 feet deep. So clearly, nobody was doing a rope swing and jumping into the lake at a 3-foot depth back in the day. That was probably much cheaper than that.
So we could pretty much say, Ruth, silt pond is probably 1 foot, was 1 foot deep before you cleaned the sludge, but at its peak, it was probably 10 feet deep.
At least 10 feet. And I'll go home and look it up.
After the water goes from Silver Creek and feeds into Paw Paw, where does it exit then? Does it go into Russell Township? And still
Yeah,
Silver
it goes
Creek?
into-
Silver Creek keeps going through it.
It goes into Deer Lakes.
Music place, I think it's called, which they just dredged.
And then Silver Creek keeps going.
So
There's 2 streets that come off of Music that are the HOA for that, and I don't remember the names of them, but it's Deer Lake subdivision.
when we talk the public versus private property, and I don't know the answer, I'm not a lawyer. Maybe one of the lawyers knows, or Eric. When I go fishing on a river, it's public property. If I go on the banks, it could potentially be on private property, but the waterway technically be public property.
Yeah, it's generally how it is. I don't know what the threshold is for how big the waterway needs to be for it to be like waters of the state. But that is a legal term.
I think legally, Paw Paw Lake owns the lake, but because it's I forget the term, but a waterway, we are governed, we don't have a lot of discretion on what we do. So for example, our dam is regulated by ODNR. The lake would be regulated by, among other things, probably the EPA and whatever else governmental agencies regulate streams and lakes. You can't, it's not a public lake, and then people who aren't members of our community can't come fish and swim in it, but we have very limited discretion. Like, for example, I joked at the last meeting, we're gonna put a screen up to catch all the silt at the bridge so that all the silt accumulates under the bridge and you guys can clean it out once a year instead of us having to deal with it, and we'll just get clean water coming through. I joke about that, but we can't legally do that because it's regulated by, whatever governmental agency regulates streams, lakes, rivers.
Well, it occurred to us that this is largely a maintenance issue. You're getting more silt because there's more water, there's higher volume, faster, et cetera. So the maintenance has to be done more often than 30 years ago. And we've seen that throughout the village, that we're getting more water, at least harder water than we used to. That's why we built the detention pond over here. And that's also why we did the Manabrook project over there. But one of the guiding principles was that both those projects affect more than one neighborhood. So Kensington feeds into that detention pond. It affects Chagrin Lakes, it goes to Parkland, it winds up down by Chelsea and on over. The same with the other side, it affects Manor the houses that are on the east side of Chillicothe Road, and then over to Fox Run, and then eventually through
Sugar Bush.
down, and then down from there. Your pond deals really with just Paw Paw, because it flows north. The water comes in from the south, it flows north. So the neighborhood that's affected really is yours alone. But because it's a stormwater erosion type of issue, I think the village can probably address it. But I will say this, Lake Louise asked us for monetary assistance when they did their silt pond, and they didn't get it. So this is something of a change for us in that their silt pond and their lake affects your neighborhood, and that would seem to fit within the rubric that we came up with. So it may be that the best solution, and I offer this to you, council hasn't approved it by any means, but as a suggestion, the village would take over the silt pond. If Paw Paw ceded the silt pond land to the village, and the village would thereafter be responsible for maintaining it at the design depth that might be. We would also explore putting a second silt pond south of Bell Road, but that's on private property, and we would have to get an easement or something from the property owners to do that. But it's a ravine, so it's not buildable, but that might be a two-pronged approach to solve your swim lake problem. And then the village would have to maintain it, both of them, perpetually. There's two members of the board here. I don't expect you guys to come to a decision right now. I'm sure this has to be discussed with other board members. It may require a vote of the entire Paw Paw community, and it may be far more involved than just what I'm talking about here. The engineer can certainly weigh in on what would need to be done, but if it needed to be maintained annually, let's say, that would be perhaps a better solution than doing it every 8 years when you have to dig the whole thing up and then find a place to dispose of the silt. And that's really, as I understand it, the cost of when you do these dredging operations is where you put the silt and how you get it there. The trucks are very expensive, as I recall.
If you ship it off-site, that adds significant expense because we don't ship it off-site. because of the expense. That's why we find places to put it, dry it out, and then grade it once it's dried out. There are 3 members of the board here.
Okay.
But the board couldn't, even if the entire board was here, the board couldn't act on such a proposal without a special meeting of our community. It depends also on what you mean by seed the silt pond. If you're talking about some type of legal transaction that transfers ownership of the silt pond boundaries to the village, then you're talking about changing deed restrictions for the community. That's gonna require legal documents and transactions are gonna require the board to have a special meeting for the entire community to vote on, because it's, I mean, technically speaking, it's part of our acreage. I can tell you there wouldn't be much interest in seeding the land next to the silt pond, but I don't think that's what you're asking for. We can give you an easement to maintain the silt pond. I think what you're asking for is the silt pond itself, which is just the water portion of it. So it's complicated from a legal perspective. It's not something that I would dismiss out of hand, because it may solve at least part of our problem, which is that you bear if done right, if we ultimately get the lake to where it's supposed to be, if the silt pond's maintained properly, the lake will last 50 years instead of having to do it repeatedly. The problem is that the silt pond hasn't been maintained to the level that it needs to be to protect the lake. So it's something that our community can certainly talk about.
The complicated nature of these transactions, we're pretty familiar with, in that Manor Brook Phase 1 took, 3 years?
Yeah.
To eventually get from the point, actually, it took longer, because it was in the 2004 stormwater study, wasn't it?
It was, but we didn't aggressively pursue it in 2000.
We had our first meeting in January of 2019.
Okay.
Do you know what they're talking about? So.
Swale.
Mhm, mhm. And
So,
it got a little, Mark can address it better than I can.
well, it took 4 years because of problems with ownership between various entities. Surprisingly, Whitetail owns it, even though it's Manor Brook Gardens is right next door to it. And Whitetail gave us the easement to make that happen. Manor Brook, that's north of Manor Brook Drive, for those who are familiar with the area. The project south of Manor Brook Drive was supposed to be all at once, both sides of the road, but because Manor Brook Gardens wasn't giving us the easement that we needed for that project, we only did the one side. But it's gonna solve a problem for Bellwood, the people who live along Chillicothe on the east side. It's going to solve some of the problems for Manor Brook, but it doesn't help Fox Run at all, okay? So there's limits to what we do. But what I am talking about is that the village would own the acreage around the silt pond and the silt pond. We would maintain it, and that is a significant expense for the village going forward. So 1,400 homes, 44,000 people are paying for your silt pond, and you have what, 41 homes? Maybe 150 people? 42?
Don't take this the wrong way, but our community pays for everybody else's stuff over and over again, so we're not that sympathetic, but we understand that that is your position. Our position is a little bit different, and I think we can respect each other's positions on that.
You can, because
We
you
pay a lot of
guys,
money for services that you do not receive.
one thing, it's because you guys helped pay for Manor Brook Phase 1, the detention pond, so did Kensington. Everybody to the east kicked in through taxes for those projects, but primarily helped the people on the western side of Bell Road. So we're in this together. And we've said that many, many times before, but typically we have only pursued projects that help more than one neighborhood. This is a departure for us, because this is primarily, some people might even say exclusively, a Paw Paw problem. But we're getting more rain, we're using less salt, we're not getting the snow we used to. Anybody who grew up here in the 70s remembers the great storm of 78 to 77, right? That doesn't happen the way it used to, okay? And there's only one person nodding, so I'm kind of dating
No,
myself.
but I agree with you. The only thing I would say though is that when you can look at all of the building that's going on in Ashley, and down Bell Road, I mean, significant homes.
Oh, without that.
And that is just continuing. We see that you're on Snyder now, and I believe that's South Russell. They're clearing out what is now a marsh, basically, and we're gonna build something. So you're gonna have runoff that's coming that way or our way, and it's gonna continue. It's just a problem that's gonna just keep building and building and building. So it's important for us to work together and figure out. a
It
solution.
is. Yeah.
Before you mentioned the 42 homes and talking about how many people and all of that, long before you said all that, I wanted to point out that I don't appreciate the repositioning of the problem as just fixing a swim lake. That is an impact. But in the first stormwater meeting I was at in September, the statements I made were repositioned by Councilman Balicki in a future meeting that I watched on YouTube as a sewer septic runoff issue, which did address the silt, we repositioned the issue. Last week's meeting, at least we got to this state, and you're repositioning our silt, the one silt pond, which is a huge issue of the overarching issue, it's a huge issue, as being a swim lake issue. And I appreciate that we're talking about a solution for the silt pond because that's a huge portion of this issue. But the next phase of it is also the stormwater remediation from all over, which engineer Eric mentioned, it's all over the place. So while I'm not looking for any solution or all solutions today, like I just don't want this conversation to just keep being repositioned down to 42 homes in their swim lake for their like lifestyle and good. Like this is wildly affecting all of our like property value, how much money we spent, our HOA, and it's like not something we can control. So I just really want to make the point that like it's not just for so my kids can swim. It's a much bigger issue than that, than just repositioning like silt pond lifestyle goodness for 42 homes.
The point I was making is that your swim lake, your pond, your silt pond is for Paw Paw. And you're asking the village, correct me if I'm wrong, to fix or help you fix that problem. And that's how I see it, but because it's a stormwater issue, the village should address it. The proposal that we're thinking of is that you transfer ownership of the acreage around the silt pond to the village, and then the village maintains it. And we pursue the possibility, I make no guarantees, the silt pond south of Bell Road, if the property owners are willing to work with us. Yes?
When you say the acreage, I mean, I just want to clarify, because you keep saying the acreage around the silt pond. Rich had brought up the idea of like just the silt pond, like a perimeter of the silt pond, and granting you an easement to go through that front acreage to get to the silt pond. But you keep referring to it as the acreage around the silt pond, so are you saying the only way you guys would consider it is that whole front area that abuts Bell Road would be ceded to you guys?
We have to be able to get in and out with the equipment.
Well, that's why I said that an easement could accomplish that without us.
And perhaps stockpile and store the material to dry it, to truck it, so I mean.
Yeah, you can have the easement. Look, if you take that property, you're gonna have to cut that.
They'll keep them out.
You're gonna have to maintain more than the silt pond.
We have done this for the central retention basin. We have an easement over on Manor Brook Phase 1. That's
We don't have-
right.
I mean, if ultimately we give you an easement, we can continue to maintain the grass, the grass area. You get, when you need to maintain it, you come in, you can move heavy equipment, store stuff, that's not gonna be an issue. The question is, how much land are you talking about seeding? And I also, without getting into a lot of these details now, those are details that have to be worked out at a meeting other than this. But I think that would be less popular if we're giving up grass space than giving up a silt pond. Because not a lot of people hang out in a silt pond, although we're getting to the point where we might build a house on the silt that's accumulating.
We'll have another lot.
Sell that as an
There you go.
On steps.
Well, I mean, that's the proposal the council is considering.
Well, okay, there's an option. Are there other options? Are there other considerations? I mean, we've raised the issue of south of Bell and a silt pond. Are there other considerations that we should be thinking about as solutions for these problems?
I just want to clarify, south of Bell, that is Bramble Farms. That's Bramble Farms set aside land. They can't build houses on there. So if you go down to the Bell Road Bridge and our silt pond is to your back, you're looking at property that can't be developed. And it's an odd, if you have your maps in front of you, it's an odd kind of squiggle to the right there. And I'd want you to go home and look it up on RealLink, the county website. And Silver Creek runs through almost all of that. So a silt pond there, to me, would be a great thing.
But I think that you're on the, personally, and I'm not an engineer, I'm a lawyer who acts like an engineer when it matters, but I'm not an engineer. But I think you're on the right track with the idea of putting a silt pond on the other side or doing something to maintain our silt pond. The issue is, I think, slowing down the speed of water and ultimately slowing down the sediment that flows through there so that it isn't getting to a silt pond. And so if you're doing things that reduce sediment and slow it down so that it can accumulate in a place that's easier to manage, then you're starting to solve that problem. Because ultimately the problem is the speed with which it's accumulating. And so anything that slows that down, I think, is the right approach. And I think it probably goes, it may go farther upstream than we even appreciate. There's a lot of sediment that flows from, projects that are being done, even maybe outside of South Russell. And so it may not just be a South Russell issue, or we want to get other people involved.
Well, to that point, like slowing down the water and storm water solutions, it'll affect not just the 42 Paw Paw properties, but like how many, even on Bell Road, like the Self's property, and I don't know all those neighbors' names, Milko's property,
Yes.
on and on and on and on. Like, how many actual communities can this support spice slope, because it all slopes down?
How big's your, acreage wise, how big's your silt pond?
That's an acre and a half, I believe. The lake itself is 12 acres.
No, no.
Well, we have a public utilities meeting coming up. I think it's the first Friday in May. Should be May the 4th,
Right.
5th, May the 5th.
A week from Friday.
Yeah, and we would explore this further. And, I can tell you that I think council is willing to provide you a written proposal for your consideration. And whether you say yay or nay or tell us to go, no pun intended, jump in the lake, jump in the silt pond, perhaps that's better. That's a step forward.
And I appreciate that.
Okay. It's getting near 6:30. Anything else? I have one last comment. Next Wednesday, 2 people from the Chagrin River Watershed Partners. They're the ones that help us with these big projects. And hopefully somebody from CT. We're meeting with Congressman Joyce's office. That's not Congressman Joyce, but we're meeting him for a luncheon meeting to frankly just look at somebody else providing money for this issue. So if you could come next Friday, or Ruth, we could get the, I'm sure we're not going to get an answer, but at least we're looking to see, we always look to see for somebody else to put the bill, and we'll keep turning up where we can find. Chagrin River Watershed Partners are good at finding money, but this issue, this is just one of the issues. So-
Is that at 11:30 on the 3rd
That's 11:30 in Kent
in Kent?
You sent an email about that, Bill, I think? This meeting, Joyce's office? I think I saw that come around.
I have one.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that is, that would be, we go down there. Is that at Congressman Joyce's office in
No,
Kansas?
no, his representative, his communications director is based in Ravenna, so we picked Kent as kind of a halfway spot. And we, just gonna have a lunch and say, here's our problem, is there money out there that we can go after? So,
We've been fortunate, when we did Manabrook Phase 1, we had a grant. We had a grant for the central retention basin. Didn't cover the whole thing by any means, but it was much better than us footing the village, us footing the bill for the whole thing, okay? And that may be possible here too, to address the silt pond, swim lake, stormwater issue that we're talking about here.
we just picked up a little over $1 million to do Bell Road East. So we keep digging to find somebody else's money. Anything else before we adjourn? To repeat, next Friday, 9 o'clock, public choice is here. Okay. You get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Porter, seconded by Canton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thanks for volunteering.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the website? Let's see if it'll come up. Yeah, I got it. Are you ready?
Well, good.
I'll look up some junk.
Yeah.